Hi, I'm Jack Rose. This is Biz Reorg. Today we're going to tell you how to improve your business. What if you could grow your business by 30% or more by doing some very simple things? And they're also the right thing. But first, we're going to get to an issue that's very, very important to me and to the people who are working on this channel. November 8th, 2024. In Amsterdam, 5 people were hospitalized, 62 were arrested after a riot broke out after a soccer game. Probably not a very unusual thing following a soccer game, at least not in Europe. This soccer game was between an Israeli team and an Amsterdam team. At one point during the riot, a car drove over a fan who was an Israeli fan. Fans yelled, "Run him over," and the car driver did. Other fans were beaten with bats, were kicked, had their heads stomped. There's no excuse for this. Bigotry, anti-Semitism are not at this point limited to Europe. There's a wave of it also developing in the United States, and it's growing. And it can only be combated by those of us who believe it's wrong, standing up and taking action, which is why we're making this video and putting it out today. Because watching this, we realized we had to say something. It's also the best thing you can do for your business to grow your business. When you see something like this, say something. Mention it, talk about it. If we don't talk about it, things won't change. So where did this start? Let's look at it. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas took 251 Israeli civilians. We know the story. They took them hostage. They killed 1,195 Israelis and foreign nationals in an unprovoked attack. Maybe everybody's forgotten that because since then, in the Gaza War, there's been 40,000 deaths. But remember, there were almost 1,200 deaths and 250 hostages taken that started all of this. And we've all seen images that have been burned into our minds, both with that initial act and with what's happened since then. And these images are horrifying. And there are moral incongruities on both sides that have been burned into everyone's mind. Clearly, Israel has every right to defend itself. Yet everyone, including Israel, has expressed its concern for humanitarian issues. Hamas has taken actions that are indefensible. Israel is in a near impossible position as to what to do to defend its people, to eliminate the threat presented by Hamas, and at the same time address humanitarian issues. No matter what the situation, violence like we saw in Amsterdam cannot be allowed to go forward, nor can anti-Semitism be allowed to exist in a free society. Winston Churchill said, "All that is necessary for evil to prevail is for good men to remain silent." For that reason, this channel will from time to time bring you videos like this on issues that we believe are getting pushed to the side column on pages buried deep back on probably the website you're visiting, or not getting reported at all. I have visited the concentration camps in Eastern Europe. I've walked the tracks, I've sat in the cells, I've seen the piles of shoes, glasses, and cases. I've walked through the gates of Auschwitz. Our beat mocked free. Work shall set you free. Work shall set you free. But many of those who walked through those gates would never leave. They'd never take another breath after they walk through those gates. We can never allow this to happen again. Yet it can happen very easily because there is a wave of anti-Semitism and bigotry spreading across America. This cannot be allowed to continue. I am a lawyer. I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. Fundamental to that Constitution are certain freedoms. Among those freedoms is the freedom to live free of fear. If you won't do it for that reason, do it for your own economic self-interest. These issues will affect your business. What if I told you that I could increase your business by 30%? We're a divided nation. We are made up of so many small groups. Most people in the last election voted on probably one issue, maybe two, and they picked a candidate. Can you afford to alienate any of those groups if you're running a business? Not only do you alienate that group, but you alienate every person they talk to, because they're going to tell them all about what you said to them. If you're seen as a racist, you're seen as a bigot. You just chase them away. Same with your friends. In an era when books like Bowling Alone are out there, and we hear about the lack of community, it's issues like this that divide us, not bring us together. And let's look at the threats globally that currently exist. There are 3 different areas of the globe right now that present substantial risks to the planet and also to the United States. These are probably the biggest risks that are faced by business today. So if we're looking for where disruption comes from, let's put aside energy. We just started talking about the Middle East, so let's go a little bit deeper. And why does somebody in the United States care? Well, currently you have Israel, Iran, and Lebanon directly involved in the conflict in Gaza. However, that's not where it's probably going to end. Oh, you're saying, what about Palestine and the Palestinians? They're not a country. There is no Palestinian country. There's no Palestinian nation. The other key players in that fight, on the suppliers, you have the United States and Russia officially. Probably China's in there. Maybe North Korea. And who knows who else. On the ground and support capacity, whatever that means, you have the US and Russia definitely, and pick among the others who may be there. Key in the Middle East who could get drawn in: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and maybe Egypt. Global risks presented by this: the closing of the Suez Canal. Remember when that happened last time? Want to see the price of goods go up? Or want to see an interruption to all the services you look for? Watch when the Suez Canal gets shut down. Oil supplies being shut down, either due to various countries deciding they just won't pump oil, or tankers not being able to get through the Suez Canal. Either one could do it. Offsets to some of these risks, you're saying? New president of the United States. He's going to increase oil production out of the US. Number 1, it takes time to get oil production back up. Number 2, there's different types of oil, and not all of the oil that's produced in the US can be used in the US due to the environmental laws. We still need certain types of oil that come from overseas, a lot of it from the Middle East, and we sell a lot of it that's produced here. Let's go to the next section. Ukraine. Everybody's familiar with Ukraine. Ukraine rejected a ceasefire offer from Russia. Ironic, given that President Biden has pledged continued support to Zelensky. At the same time, the president-elect had a discussion with Vladimir Putin, and Zelensky and Putin just called for a ceasefire on the one hand, while Putin also hit the Ukraine with a barrage of missiles. Take that for what it's worth. So why should the rest of Europe care about Ukraine, and why should the United States care about Ukraine? Actually, most people think the Ukrainian conflict began in 2022. It didn't. The Ukrainian conflict began in 2014 when Russia took Crimea, which was part of Ukraine. And they just marched in, took it, and annexed it, and nobody said anything. And basically took the view of, oh, that's over. Well, it wasn't. 2022, this occurred. Started humanitarian crisis due to the refugee crisis that immediately followed, and here we are today with the largest war that's gone on since World War II. Fast forward, and you see where we are with cyber warfare, mercenaries, and large expenses from virtually every Western country and Russia, probably China, although we can't document that. So why is this so important? Number 1 for Europe, energy supplies. We're again talking about energy. The gas supply for Western Europe runs through Ukraine. Number 2, humanitarian issues. Huge humanitarian crisis, potential war crimes. We've had refugees coming out of Ukraine. We have potential war crimes that have been alleged. All of this is just coming apart. Similar in Israel, there's war crime issues. In the Gaza War, all of this is going to have to be sorted out down the road. The next issue with Ukraine is shipping. Ukraine has some of the best ports in the area. On the Black Sea, those include Odessa and Pivdeny. It also has ports on the Azov Sea in Mariupol, Berdiansky, Skadovsk, Yevpatoria, Sevastopol, Yalta, Fedosia, and Kerch, all of which are now occupied by Russia. And on the Danube River, it's got Izmail, Renil, and Ust-Donetsk. And then on the Dnipro River, It has Kursk and Mykolaiv, which are blocked by the Russian Army and Navy. So when you look at it for purposes of commerce, there's tremendous commerce that moves through Ukraine. For geopolitical security, and this may be one of the biggest ones, and now we're going to get into the U.S. interests, the following countries border Ukraine: Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. And you're saying, now I understand why those countries care. Maybe why Western Europe's starting to get concerned, because if they get into them, they're closer to most of the Western European countries. Why does the United States care? Well, remember there's this little organization called NATO. And NATO has a section of its treaty called Article 5. Under Article 5 of NATO, if one nation is attacked, all nations have pledged to go to the defense of the other. That includes sending in troops and doing whatever's necessary. I'm going to come to that in a minute. So let's go through those countries again. Poland, Hungary, and Romania are all NATO members, as are most of the Western European countries and the United States. For those of you watching this in the United States, an attack against any one of those countries is an attack against the United States. That puts it in the simplest terms. An attack against any one of those countries is an attack against the UK, an attack against France, an attack against Turkey. How's that for simple? You're saying, well, there's no precedent for using Article 5. Not so fast, Skippy. On 9/11, within 24 hours, the NATO countries voted to invoke Article 5. All came to the defense of the United States. Sharing intelligence, sharing military forces, sharing covert forces. Accordingly, there is precedent. Failure to abide by Article 5 would cause the collapse of NATO. Therefore, should one of those countries be attacked, the United States would be obligated to go to that country's aid, as would the other NATO countries, or the partnership would fall apart, which would lead to a collapse of the geopolitical system and probably commerce as we know it, because the high seas would become open to pirates. For European security and world peace, Ukraine is probably the cornerstone. I don't believe I'm overstating this. Let's look at another piece that may be a cornerstone. In Asia, you have Taiwan. No, let's call it China. And when we talk about China, the question is always which China? Because you have Taiwan, the island nation, which is really a prosperous democracy, a stronghold of democracy in that part of the world. And it's an archipelago, an island archipelago. And if you look at it on a map, you'll see it sits there right off the coast of mainland China. But the People's Republic of China has its one China policy and wants reunification at all cost, and has been becoming more aggressive, and continuously runs military exercises off the coast to test the reflexes of Taiwan. In 2022, President Biden repeatedly pledged U.S. forces to defend Taiwan. Most experts believe that's what's kept Taiwan safe. The question is, what happens if that support isn't there? Now, our allies in that region include the Philippines, South Korea, and Japan. All of them have a bloody history with China. All of them are relying on Taiwan to be the block to Chinese expansion. There's no question, just as Russia seems to have imperialist goals, so does China. So when we look at global expansion, these are the countries you look at. This is where business is built. This is where business goes. When you look at where geopolitical stability comes from, this is it. It's unclear under the new administration what position Donald Trump will take. He seems to consider himself the ultimate deal maker. But without a pledge of military support, China seems to think negotiations are done with the military. And they've seemed openly willing to state that. Will Donald Trump make the pledge that he will use force, if necessary, to protect Taiwan? ROC probably can't survive without that. And that's going to be a question that has to be answered fairly fast, because the threat's very real. And it's likely that this new administration will be tested fairly quick. And our allies in the region will be looking for an answer. So what's on the island that's so important? How about most of the chips that run all the products that we all seem to like using so much, like the camera that's being used to record this video? Probably like the car you're driving and the phone you're using, the refrigerator in your house, the coffee maker you use. If you use a train to get to work, planes you fly on, just about everything we use in everyday life today. Without those chips, everything shuts down. If China controls that supply, things are going to get very, very difficult, very, very fast. There's no question why they want to control it, and there's every reason for us to not let that happen. These are just some of the issues facing us today. You can say you don't want the United States to be the world cop, but if democracy's to survive, the United States needs to take an active role. If freedom's to survive, the United States needs to take an active role. Ronald Reagan said, democracy is only one generation away from extinction. We need to remember that, and we need to be active, and we need to defend our way of life from attacks by those who don't believe in it. And we need to stand up and do what needs to be done to protect the way of life, to protect your family, and protect your economic well-being. So if you don't believe in it because morally you feel it's right, do it to protect your own economic self-interest. This is Jack Rose with Biz Reorg.